Hey guys, I'm Mary and welcome back to my channel. So I know it's been a minute since I posted a video. I had some things that kind of got in the way of filming, and then like some other scheduling things got in the way of filming, and I've been trying to figure out how to fit filming back into my schedule now that my schedule has been changing a lot from what it used to be back when I first started my channel, where it was much easier to consistently film. So trying to figure that out so we can get back to posting a little bit more consistently. But I had a chance today, right after work, still in my work clothes, to sit down and film my very belated August wrap-up. So let's get started with that. So, in the month of August, I read 13 total books. I read 7 fantasy, 2 romance, 1 sci-fi, and 3 mystery thriller, which might be the most mystery thriller I've ever read in 1 month. Well, a little bit of a kick there, I guess. And then my average rating for the month was a 3.73, which feels a little... I cannot remember off the top of my head the previous month's average rating, but this month definitely felt a little bit of a down month on the reading. I hit a stretch where I just had a couple kind of 3s in a row, and it was definitely a lull in the middle of the month as far as reading. But I did have good things too, so it wasn't an all bad month either. So I'll just get started and just go through in the order I read them. So first up, I read Jade War. I finished this up at the beginning of August. I think I mostly actually read this in July, but I finished it in August. Is the first book I finished. So I really enjoyed this. I gave this a 4.5 star. I definitely like this better than Jade City. I became a lot more attached to the characters in this one, which was one of the things that kind of held me back from absolutely loving Jade City, was I just never fully got invested in the characters, and I felt much more invested in the characters after this one. I do think plot-wise, something about the way Fonda Lee just writes, I think just moves slowly for me while reading, which is not something I love, but I still obviously very much like this book. Despite that, I am very excited to get to Jade Legacy, and I am very excited because I got an e-arc of it from NetGalley recently, so we'll probably be reading that in October, and I cannot wait. But yeah, this one I think is definitely a step up from Jade City, and I expect Jade Legacy to be yet another step up. Next, I read To Have and to Hoax by Martha Waters. This is the first book in an historical romance series, and this is kind of like more like a historical romance rom-com vibe of writing, and this book fought for me is what happened. So I was very excited to love it, because this is about Lady Violet and Lord James, who got married 5 years ago, and then 4 years ago, a year into their marriage, they had this big fight and then just like haven't spoken since. But now, in the present day, Violet gets a letter telling her that James I think it got kicked off his horse was what it was, and is injured and may or may not live. And so she races to his side in the countryside to find he's just totally fine. And what happened was James's friend thought he wasn't going to be okay and wrote to her. And then once they realized he was fine, he didn't think to like write a second letter being like, JK, we good. But so after going through that distress, it's like the emotional like, oh shit, we haven't talked to him forever, but he might die, was like enough to be like, oh gosh. And so to get back at him for inflicting this emotion and like trick on her, she decides to fake an illness to kind of get back at him, get that same emotional reaction out of him. And so I thought this was going to be kind of like a historical romance version of the book That You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogel, which was a similar prank war between a couple who's kind of was in love and isn't anymore, and they fall back in love over the course of the prank war, because I loved that book, but it was not. So first off, prank war is not what we got. It was like, you had that first hoax with the horse and her thinking he was gonna die, which wasn't even like a purposeful hoax. Like I had thought he was gonna start this off on purpose, but it wasn't. It was like the friend wrote the letter and he didn't even realize. So already kind of like, okay, not exactly what I expected, but you know, try not to judge based just on expectations and try to focus on the execution of what it actually is, you know? But then when she comes back with her hoax, I was like, okay, but then that was it. There was no more hoaxes. Like, instead of doing this back and forth, it was just her just stringing along this fake illness storyline, and it became boring. There hit a point where he obviously figured out she was faking, and she just kept doubling and tripling down on it, and it just got boring. I just like wanted them to do like a prank war to like keep the plot interesting, because I was just like it didn't hook me anymore. There were a couple things I did like. I did like the lighter tone with which this book was written. I enjoyed that. It definitely had a much more lighter feel, kind of like that rom-com-y vibe. And I did like some of the secondary characters, and there were scenes within this book with the two main characters that did click really well every so often. It was like you'd hit one scene, I'd be like, that scene was great. And then we do a couple more chapters of just like snooze fest. So this was not what I wanted to be, and there is more books in this series. I'm like kind of interested because I liked the side characters, but I'm just not sold on the author being able to execute it well. So we'll see if I pick any of those up. Next I read Among Thieves by NJ Kuhn. I have a full video review of this because I got this as an ARC, and I will link that review to get my full thoughts, but the TLDR is I like this. This was a very fun standalone. It was a fantasy heist story, and if you just want a fun fantasy heist story, you should pick this book up. It was delightful. It was a 4-star read for me. It made me wish there were going to be more books in this world, which I think the author said she would like to write more, but currently has no plans to. Like, this was published as a standalone, and if there are more books in this world, I would definitely love to read more in this world and with these characters. But yeah, check out my full thoughts in my review, linked. Next, I read Rebel by Marie Lu. This is the 4th book in the Legend series. The Legend series was originally a trilogy, and it was one of my favorite trilogies at the time of its publication. Back when I was in high school, it came out like during the height of the YA dystopian craze, and I was all in on YA dystopian in high school, and I loved this. This was like one of the crowning jewels of that subgenre for me at the time. So this is a sequel to that trilogy that came out years later, and I picked this up as part of a book club read in August, and I liked it. This book takes place 10 years after the end of the 10 years after the end of the trilogy, and it primarily follows the younger brother of one of the main characters in the trilogy. However, the 2 main characters from the trilogy, Day and June, do have a secondary storyline in this, and I think their storyline was the one flaw in this book. High school me would disagree, because high school me loved them so much and would have loved what happened with their characters in this book. But adult me is like, their secondary storyline felt very fan servicey, and it would have worked better, I think, as just like a little like bonus epilogue on like her website, a newsletter kind of thing, and if she just left this book to be entirely the brothers' story, because I really did like the brothers' story, and I very much enjoyed this return to this world. So this is billed as a standalone, that you don't have to read the first trilogy, but if you have any interest in the series, I would read the trilogy first, because I would not read this one and then read the trilogy if you know you want to read all 4. But if you're only interested in this one, you definitely could pick it up as a standalone. I think the main storyline definitely works as a standalone. Next, I read Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune, and I also have a full video review for this one that I will link, but in short, this book was just okay, and it hurts me to say that because I really, really enjoyed The House on the Cerulean Sea, and this one just missed the mark. This was a 3-star read for me, so it was just fine. Mostly I was bored by it until the last 15%. The first chapter and the last 15% were great, and the rest was just kind of boring. You do still get the, I guess, trademark writing, whimsical, fun, like the light, whimsical writing style that you get with TJ Klune in House on the Cerulean Sea. So if that's what you really loved about House on the Cerulean Sea, you definitely get that in this one, which I liked. I just found the story and the main characters to be kind of boring. So if you want to hear more details on that, I will link my full review. Next, I read The Ladies of the Secret Circus by Constance. This is a kind of a mishmash of fantasy and a contemporary fantasy and historical. And so we have 2 storylines. We follow Lara in 2005 as she is searching for answers after her fiancé mysteriously disappears on their wedding day. It's about a year later, and she's kind of searching for answers, and this leads her to discovering her great-grandmother's journals that talk about this mystical circus. And the other storyline is told through these journals of the great-grandmother in Paris in the 1920s and this mystical, kind of dark, demonic secret circus, and it's really interesting. It had a slow start, but once it got going and definitely hooked my interest. I really liked the circus vibes in this one. If you liked the night circus, you'd probably like this book. It was a very interesting mystery, and I enjoyed it. Next is one of my most disappointing reads recently, definitely of this month, just as far as expectations to reality, and that was The Bombay Prince by Sujata Massey. I'm so sad that I could only give this book 3 stars. Truly devastated. This is the 3rd book in the Perveen Mystery series, which is a series of historical mysteries following Perveen Mystery, who is a female lawyer in 1920s India, and I adored the first 2 books in the series. I read them, I binged them at the beginning of 2020, and I've been very eagerly waiting this 3rd book to come out this year, and it just was like, I just didn't like it. I just didn't love it, and I'm so sad. I'm not sure if my tastes have just changed since I read the first two, because I have been reading more mysteries recently, and at the time of reading the first two, I didn't read mysteries all that much. Or if, like, the book itself just wasn't as good, because it's been long enough since I read the first two that I just don't remember, like, the details. And in this one, I just found the writing to be kind of stilted, and I didn't enjoy reading it, which, again, is such a weird thing, because I read 3 of her books. The other 2 books in the series and the third historical fiction standalone, I read all in the first few months of 2020, and they were all 5 stars. So I'm like, have my taste changed? Or did her writing just get worse in this one? I'm, like, questioning everything. And beyond the writing, the story in this one just didn't hook me. Like, the mystery story. The death that they're, like, investigating happens very early in the book, but it wasn't until the halfway point that it felt like the murder mystery storyline actually started getting, like, investigated. It was like, and, like, what was happening before them felt like a lot of nothing. It felt like a lot of this, them just, like, writing between the hotel and their house in their car. And, like, that was it. Like, it wasn't like there was another storyline happening that there, like, wasn't anything else happening. And then when the murder mystery did get going, it felt like it only actually ended up taking up, like, 4 chapters worth of space in this book. And I was like, what was the rest of this book about? Like, I just wanted the mystery to be the whole book instead of the mystery being a tiny bit and then, like, nothing. But I did still like Pervy Mystery, our main character. I still like the side characters. There was a little hint at a side plot romance that I've been invested in since the other books, so I do not know if there's going to be another book in this series, and if there is, I will still pick it up and hope that this is the fluke book, and not that my tastes have just changed such that I dislike them, because that'll make me very sad, because I have very fond memories of the first 2. Next, I read another mystery, The Swap by Robyn Harding. Like, what is this book about? How do I even describe what this book is about? There's this teenager named Lo, who's kind of like, she doesn't really have friends, and she's, like, about to graduate high school, or has just graduated high school, and she's kind of just, like, on this Pacific Northwest island, like, futzing about, not much to do, and then she becomes friends with this new adult arrival on the island, the social media influencer, who is there with her professional hockey husband, and she owns the local pottery studio, and so she starts teaching pottery lessons that Lo takes from her, and they get entangled in this weird friendship that feels, like, very intense and kind of codependent in many ways. And then this third character enters, Jamie, who owns, like, the local mercantile store, and she becomes friends with Freya, the pottery instructor, and so they're both adults. And so after that happens, Freya, like, drops Lo, the teenager, as a friend, and there's, like, this whole, like, circle of, like, manipulation happening. And there's also a secondary plot line where Jamie really wants kids, and then at some point they swap husbands as partners at this party. There's just, like, it's, like, very tangled web. There's a lot of manipulation going on. There's some mystery. It's a lot, and it was just okay. This was another just okay 3-star mystery for me. And I realized I did a horrible job explaining this plot, but it's been a minute, and it was kind of all tangled at the time. So this one, like, there was, like, an initial conflict, and it just was, like, not compelling. That was the problem. Was I got to that first conflict, and I was like, that's it? That's the whole conflict? And then we did get to a later conflict, and the end really ramped up. It had a very exciting ending to this book, but that first, most of it was just kind of, like, fine. So it was okay. It was fine. That's just kind of felt about it. Next, I read Drowned Country by Emily Tesh, and I really don't have much to say about this novella. It's the second novella in the Green Hollow duology, and much like the first book, these books are just kind of all about the vibes. It's like this, like, mystical, magic forest man vibes, and, like, that's just kind of what these novellas are. They're just about the vibes, and, like, that kind of sounds like a fun vibe to you. You should read it. If it's not, maybe don't pick it up. Don't really have many opinions on this one, but, like, I liked it. I liked the first one. That's kind of all I got to say. Next, I read Red Sister by Mark Lawrence, and this was a 3.5-star book for me, which I wish it had been higher, but here we are. So the thing with this book is, so it's about Nona Gray, who's this 9-year-old who gets taken to this convent that is essentially kind of trains assassin nuns. Like, they're not all assassins. Like, some of them do different, some of them are, like, poison nuns, but that's most of the story, is kind of like a school setting vibe where she's like learning at this convent. And this had so many things in it that were the beginning of things that I really would have liked, but that never quite manifested into a fully formed thing that grabbed my attention. And so I found the book to be fine with lots of good moments, and so I'm interested in picking up the second one because this is the first book in a series, and while none of those things really manifested totally in this one and grabbed me, I do hope and think there's likely will manifest fully or more in the second book and grab me much more in the second book. So I'm definitely interested in seeing if that happens and if I like the second one and where the series goes from here. Next, I had one reread of the month, and that was Graceling by Kristin Cashore. It's probably been like 10 plus years since I've read this the first time, but this has like been a long standing on my shelves as one of my favorite fantasies for years and years, and you know what? It held up spectacularly as an adult. It was just as good. I would have rated this 5 stars if I'd read it today for the first time, so definitely recommend. This book is about Katza, who is blessed with the ability to kill people. That's her grace, and some people in the kingdom, or some people in this world have graces that are different, just like skills they're blessed with, and hers is killing. Some of them are much more mundane than that, but hers is pretty intense. And it follows her as kind of she starts to really deal with what it means to have this grace and like kind of change how she uses it and for who. And it also has a great love story in it. Katza and Poe are everything. So yeah, I love this. Definitely recommend this. It's probably one of the best YA fantasies I've ever read. There's a reason it was a favorite, and there's a reason it's still just as good. Next, I read 7 Days in June by T.O. Williams. This is a romance. This is a second chance romance. It was these two characters who had a thing, I think like 15 years ago, and parted ways and haven't seen each other in 15 years, and they see each other again, and it's like the spark is back, and also they're both writers, and they spent those 15 years secretly writing about each other in all of their books. Like each of their books has characters that are like inspired by the other, subconsciously or not, and it's great. And so we got the second chance romance aspect. We have writers. We also, our female main character has a kid who is freaking hilarious. Like, I don't look for kids in my romance books, but this one was great. I loved her. And both of the main characters are spectacular. We have great supporting characters. The voice the author writes it in is just, it was completely engrossing, and I really enjoyed just reading her writing, and the pacing of this was great. We had a dual timeline, past and current, and both were equally as interesting to me, which is the key. And I thought the two main characters had just instant chemistry as a romance. So yeah, book was phenomenal. It was 5 stars. It was probably the best book I read this month if we're excluding rereads, and definitely recommended for anyone who's a romance fan. And the last book I read this month was Survive the Night by Riley Sager, which was my 3rd mystery and also my 3rd 3-star mystery. So I read more mystery than normal this month, but I did not like them more than normal. So that was an L for the mystery genre in this month. But this book I had mixed feelings on this book. On one hand, several parts of the plot totally pulled me in. Like, I went through periods where I was like totally hooked for a couple chapters, and I did not guess the ending, which is a big plus for mystery books. Big plus. But on the other hand, the main character is frustratingly dumb at many times. Really, most times she's frustratingly dumb. Like, too stupid to live dumb. And that was kind of annoying. Like, really kind of annoying. Like, the whole premise of this book is there's a serial killer on campus, and her best friend died, and so now she's leaving campus to go home, and so she ride shares with someone, which this is not someone she's ever met before. And I'm like, girl, there's a serial killer loose, and you're gonna ride with someone you've never met before? How dumb you gotta be. Anyways, and then the other thing that really killed it for me was there is an antagonist character that was so over the top unbelievable. Like, I'm not trying to say I need all my books to be completely realistic. Like, we don't need that. But this antagonist was so over the top that I just like couldn't do it. I was like, Like, there were things, actions she did that I was like, there's literally no way. There's literally no way. And I can't give an example without giving away what character it is. And I just couldn't. I just couldn't with that. So this was a very mixed bag of emotions. So I've heard a lot of people's opinions on this book. I watched Books and Lala's like book club discussion on it, and it feels like most people either loved or hated this book. I feel kind of alone in the middle with this 3-star. Like, I feel like most hate, but some love, and not very many middle of the road. But this was just, there were things I loved and things I hated. So what a way to end my month. So yeah, that was the last book I read in August. If you've read any of these, I'd be interested to hear what you think of any of them, and I will see you in my next video.